We're now being joined by Congressman Mike Haridopolos from the great state of Florida. Congressman, good to see you.
Good to see you, Ryan.
So, Bill Posey passed away over the weekend. You replaced him in Congress. What was your relationship like with him, and what do you think his legacy is?
Well, first, it was a real loss for not only our community, but for our country. Bill is a longtime friend, just an absolute leader in our community. He actually started in the Rockledge City Council, moved up to the State House in the 1990s, over to the State Senate, where we served together in the early 2000s, and was a 16-year member of the United States Congress, really known for his ability to work with others and also on his work on financial responsibility and transparency, let alone, of course, the amazing legacy he left with Kennedy Space Center. As you know, we lost a shuttle in the early 2000s, and he was one of the leaders who helped us bring the private sector, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others back, and is a tremendous loss, not only for our community, as I mentioned, but for our nation. And we were close friends for almost 30 years.
And do you have any stories that you can share about him that defines who he was as a person and also a legislator?
Well, I think the story that defined him most in his career in the legislature was that he was the leader after the elections in 2000, as you remember, with the Chads and the hanging ballots and the amazing race between George Bush and Al Gore. He was the one who fixed the election system in Florida. He was known as Mr. Fix-It. When you had a problem, you brought it to Bill Posey. After all, he was a stock car driver. He used to work on cars. Now he works on legislation, and he did a remarkable job. And now when you look at the elections, Florida leads the nation. We have a system where you'll learn the results in just a few minutes, as opposed to the chaos in states like you see, like New York and Illinois and others. He was a real champion for that, and a guy who just was very authentic. He told me, just look, the best thing you can do in politics is, one, tell the truth, and to really know your community. And he loved our community, and he is sorely missed. And so when I got that call Thursday night, his wife called me and said he's had a stroke, and we're going to see if we can't do something. It was just a tragic phone call, and we did everything we could, but unfortunately it was just too strong, and it took him. We lost him on Saturday night.
And how are you doing, Congressman?
I'm sorry?
How are you doing since the loss?
I'm doing okay. I mean, look, you lose a friend like that, it's hard to come through. I mean, it really is. Getting the phone call, I immediately went to action because we're trying to save his life. We got able to get him on a helicopter from one hospital to another, where he had a great heart program and dealing with strokes and heart attacks. Unfortunately, it was just too dramatic, and it was too much. It was a really difficult time. I kind of had to detach myself trying to get that help to him. But his wife, Katie, who were they're high school sweethearts, and they have two amazing daughters, Kathy and Pam, and just a strong family thing. But that night, even Katie, as she recognized the reality of it all, she said, we had the best weekend the weekend before. We were with our granddaughter, who just got married down in Miami to a wonderful guy, and they just had the entire family together. And then just a few days later, we lost them. And it just really shows how precious life is and how you can't take anything for granted. But he was a can-do guy. He was a serious guy, and he wanted to get things done. And when you had a problem, you brought it to Bill Posey, and he went under the hood and got it solved.
And last question here, just you mentioned having some contact with the family. How are they doing, and how's everything going there?
Well, look, you can only imagine losing not only their dad or their husband or their grandpa. It's a lot. It's just a lot. And especially going from the highs of the previous weekend to the tragedy of Thursday night, it was just a lot to handle. And to her credit, Katie, his wife, handled it stoically. She knew what he wanted in case something tragic like this happened, and they answered the call. Fortunately, Bill was able to hang on until Saturday, when the entire family could gather around him there in Melbourne, Florida, and say their goodbyes. And we had amazing Christian music playing, and he had a Bible held in his hand. And he, as the family told me, they could feel him relax when they heard that soothing music. And the doctors believed that he could hear their voices before he finally passed. And I really appreciate, first of all, Ryan, you all recognizing his incredible service to our state and our country. And it's a big loss for our community. I know a few of the folks who work in my office still today work for him, and know how important he was to our community and how he really transformed the space industry. And I've got incredibly big shoes to fill, and I try to fill those every day because he deserves it. And we're just grateful for his service. And I know he's in a better place. He's a committed Christian, strong Christian faith, and he and his Katie will be forever linked because they just had a remarkable love affair.
Well, we appreciate you sharing what you shared with us, and deepest condolences to you and his family as well. And if we could move on to some news of the day topics, obviously there was a massive Supreme Court decision that happened late last week, essentially overturning the new maps that were supposed to be coming in Virginia ahead of the midterms. Florida's currently in the process, or just passed a new map not too long ago that should give Republicans an advantage when it comes to the midterms. First of all, what do you make of where this redistricting battle stands across the country? And is there any concern that the courtroom could be a problem for the Florida Republicans down the road, too, as it was for Virginia Democrats?
Well, it's a good question, Ryan. And we're not exactly sure how the courts will play this out. But first, talking about Virginia, let's recognize when you read the ballot language, it was just so hyper partisan. And then when you actually saw the way the districts were drawn, it looked like a Rorschach test. It didn't look like congressional districts. Everything was emanating out of the northeastern portion of the state where the strongest Democrats' votes are. And I think the court saw the obvious gerrymandering, if you want to call that, in that regard. And it was just something that was completely out of whack of what people are expecting. Yes, the voters by a narrow margin said yes because of the fact that Virginia's been a blue state for a long time. But that said, remember, this also started not in Texas this year, but it started in 2023 in New York. They made a big push to try to redraw the lines mid-decade. That eventually failed, but it set off a chain of events that we're still dealing with today. And when to your question about Florida, Ryan, and we have different standards than they do in most states. We have what's called fair districts. So when you actually look at the Florida seats, even with the recent adjustments, they actually hold county lines and city lines in most places together. So it's a little bit different, especially if you look at maybe the Illinois map, which is kind of all over the place. In our case, we try to keep counties and cities together where possible. And if you look at the voting patterns historically, I'm a history teacher, as you know that in the urban areas, the Democrats are very strong, but in every other part of the state, Republicans are very dominant. It's one of the reasons why we won the big races in 22 and 24 by such large margins. And we're seeing big changes in our elections. Just to give you one last stat, Ryan, when Ron DeSantis was elected governor back in 2018, there are 400,000 more registered Democrats. Today, there are 1.5 million more registered Republicans in Florida. So it really has dramatically changed. But the courts will decide this in the end. We'll live by those decisions. And I hope that we can really solidify these maps sooner than later so people know who's running and who they might vote for one way or the other.
And we did before, not too long before we started the recording for this interview, Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, did put out a Dear Colleagues statement essentially saying that Democrats are going to pursue redistricting in states like New York, Maryland, a couple of other blue states out there. Is there any concern about this just escalating? And do you think there are fair questions raised by the American people that this redistricting process is just exhausting considering how extensive it has been?
Well, it is exhausting. There's no doubt about it. I don't disagree with that at all. As I mentioned, let's be clear here. It started in 2023. The Democrats chose to try to draw even more partisan lines in New York. That said, I think that the courts have also made us move on some of these cases dealing with race. As you know, there's a famous Louisiana case where it changed the idea where you can't draw race-based districts anymore. I mean, let's go back to 2008. Barack Obama, African-American, won the presidency. And so I'd like to think of, for most Americans, we are colorblind. We vote for the best candidate. That said, the lines are going to be changed in many of those southern states, which we're trying to accommodate for some of the affirmative action ideas that were coming out of in the past. Now that Louisiana case is in place, you're seeing that those racially gerrymandered seats are going to be changed. It's already happened in Tennessee. I expect it to happen in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and other states where you can't draw racially charged seats. And so that might change some of the dynamics. If they look to other states, I would hope they do it based on the U.S. Supreme Court cases as opposed to just hyper-political cases like we saw in California.
And kind of moving on to our last topic here, reconciliation is going to be probably something we watch for as Congress gets back into session. The framework for this bill that would essentially fund the Department of Homeland Security for several years, including ICE and Border Patrol. Essentially, it's probably one of the few ways you have to get around the Democrats and pass something along just party lines in the Senate. But there is a question, and I think this is probably where the Democrats are trying to criticize Republicans the hardest right now, which is that the Senate bill had about $1 billion in there for security for the ballroom whenever it gets built, President Trump's ballroom that he's trying to build right now. Do you think that will be something that gets pushed back in the House when it comes to writing the final text for this?
Well, first of all, let's recognize the fact that whenever this ballroom is finished, it's not going to be just for Donald Trump. I mean, let's be clear here. This is a ballroom for the president of the United States, whoever gets elected next in 2028. And we all saw with this horrific situation a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., when you move the president, let alone members of Congress and their guests around, you create some vulnerable situations because they just don't have the same security measures at a large hotel ballroom. So the debate is going to go on. Second, I would say the White House needs to make the justification for this $1 billion for security. We want to understand it, and if it's something that's logical, I'm sure we'd support it. If it's something that's illogical, I'm sure there'll be some questions raised. So that's still early in the process. But bottom line is, we need to fully fund DHS. I mean, 10 million people did come across our border. There were sanctuary cities where people were being let out of jail just because of their immigration status and politics. And finally, now the Democrats won't fully support DHS. Now they want to add this new wrinkle. We should never even be in this case. Democrats should step up and say, we need to protect the homeland, especially when those 10 million people came in and we're in the middle of a major conflict with Iran. And as you probably reported in the last few days, there's a major stash of weapons that had attempted to come across the border in New York State. The Canadian border, not the southern border. So this is a serious time. And when people are taking on serious issues, they need to get paid for the work they're providing. Yes, the Democrats will play politics with it. And yes, Republicans are going to have to use reconciliation. But it never should have come to this level, in my opinion.
And we don't know, pretty much a lot of these CBP, ICE employees, especially down the line, not the ones who are the frontline agents, haven't seen a paycheck in weeks, and they're going to be really struggling until this bill ultimately passes. That's definitely something we should note. And you mentioned something I think it was very interesting, that you need to get more information. What kind of information do you think the administration needs to provide for Congress, and how would that look?
Well, I think what it would look like is this, is that, again, let's look at the ballroom situation recently. You've got to bring all this additional security at these ad hoc events, and you can only imagine the price tag on that. So now you want to look at the ROI. So if they make the cases like, look, we're building this building because in years past, you used to have major events in tents at the White House. And so if we're building this major building, let's bring the best security possible. And if it's a static situation, meaning that you know you're going to have events here, as opposed to ad hoc events at other places, you're going to have a lower long-term cost. So we want to look at the total cost, saying that if you know you can have these events in a safe locale to protect not just the president, members of Congress, and their guests, and you don't have to worry about creating new circumstances. Remember, just by watching that video, you saw all the things they had to bring into the location. That's time and money, and that adds to budgets. And so I want to look at ROI cost, and I can't stress it enough to your viewers. This is not for Donald Trump. This is for the presidency of the United States in an increasingly precarious time. Even myself, as a low member of Congress, a new member of Congress, sadly, I get so many threats. When I go back home, I've got 3 or 4 security people around me because of some of the crazy antics that are being played out there. So this is about a foremost security. But going back to the fundamentals, in my opinion, Ryan, pay people for the services they provide, protect people, bring them into a circumstance that makes sense. I think the president probably justify that. But yes, without doubt, anytime Donald Trump asks for money, the Democrats are going to yell and scream about it. I would argue this is the presidency, not Donald Trump. That's what we need to be looking at. And if they can justify the cost, I think Republicans will go along with it.
And how often are you seeing threats, sir? That's pretty alarming to hear you say that.
Well, it's not just me. It's many members of Congress, all types of things. And it's just one of the realities we're facing today because of this hyper-partisan world. It's the reason I've worked really hard to try to create better relationships with a lot of Democrats here on the Hill. There are some issues we're not going to agree on, sometimes on taxes, even education policy, but issues that I work on, NASA, financial services, education programs, or even environmental programs, I've got a very good working relationship with Democrats, and I hope we can take down the rhetoric, and that's the best way to do it. But we're talking the issue we're talking about today, Ryan. National security should not be a partisan issue. And we should fully fund DHS because we do face real threats at home and abroad. And when these folks are protecting the homeland, they deserve to get paid and have the equipment necessary to protect all citizens. And that's our goal here. And so these threats are real, unfortunately, and they come in. And we handle them on a ad hoc basis, but that's the reason why we're very conscious when we go out in public and kind of keep our head on the swivel, because you saw at the baseball game a few years ago in Washington, D.C., it doesn't take that many people to cause all types of chaos. And so we're always vigilant. And I'm very grateful for the law enforcement officers who volunteer their time to help look out for me when certain threats are made.
All right, Congressman Mike Haridopolos, thank you so much for your time. We hope you come back and join us again here on Live Now from Fox, but have a great day and thank you so much.
Thanks for your time, Ryan. Very much appreciated.